Okay, I'm going to do two videos this week, one on chapter 12 and then one on chapter 13, and then that's it. Next week is your exam 4, and then we'll be done. So this video here is on chapter 12 on Australia, or the Austral Realm, as they like to say. And so again, these are over my PowerPoints. I'm going to number them when I reference the slide numbers. So dealing first, of course, with Australia. Just a couple things about Australia. One is you can have them on the map there, but there's another map later. Australia is a federal government, very much like ours. Central government in Canberra, the capital, and then each province or state has its own state government, state police, state bureaucracy. It's a little more robust, probably more like ours and some other forms of federalism. You can tell, of course, by the Union Jack. They're part of the British Commonwealth, if you will, so technically under the King Charles III. And then another thing from this area you can see is because it's on the south of the equator, and of course we've already dealt with things that are south of the equator in sub-Saharan Africa and other places. But here you'll see the Southern Cross, constellation of Southern Cross on their flag, New Zealand's flag. I think New Guinea's flag as well. Anyway, that's the constellation down there. So if you're down south, you can't see the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. If you're south of the equator, you can see the Southern Cross. Obviously, given the fact that it was discovered by Europeans, Captain Cook and others, using that constellation to help navigate on the southern south of the equator. And then we'll also talk about aboriginals. Aboriginals mean Aborigines, the term sort of technically it applies to any people who were there like from the very beginning. So not just original, but aboriginal is sort of like from the very, very beginning, if you will. And that term has always been sort of identified with the Aborigines of Australia. But like a lot of these kind of demographic racial terms, it doesn't really do justice to the variety of cultures and languages and religions. And so Aborigine is not just a one label for, the original indigenous people of Australia. Even within that term, there are tribes and languages and cultures that are disparate and discrete from each other as well. Slide 3 there gives you a view of the Southern Cross. You can actually see it from Hawaii in the sky, the 4 stars. Also Alpha and Beta Centauri, you can see from there as well. So no, this is not an astronomy class, but it is part of the navigation of the oceans and on land, I guess, navigating on land when you're down south. There's a map of the territories of Australia. Victoria, Tasmania, etc. Australian Capital Territories here around Canberra. That's kind of like District of Columbia. Mexico City is kind of like that. DF, the Distrito Federal. So that sweet Hispanic Mexican accent that I have from Texas. Though it's now a state actually, but that's very common to isolate the state from the capital to sort of give it its own sort of independence. The vast emptiness of Western Australia is just huge. Of course, it's sort of stereotypical of the outback and the dryness in the desert. If you've seen any of the Mad Max movies and all that, I have a friend who was a cop in Western Australia for years, and just it'd be 5 hours from anywhere, out in the middle, literally out in the middle of nowhere. Out in the Gibson Desert, serving warrants and all those kinds of things. Fascinating. Anyway, so you get the idea there. Darwin up here at the very top of the map, again, slide 4, is the only place that was bombed by the Japanese during World War II in Australia. So they're one of our allies, have been for a century or more. And that was the first, sort of the only place that saw like actual sort of taste of World War II combat. In terms of the city of Sydney, that's very common as well if you think about it. I don't know if I talked much about this, but a lot of countries, of course, we tend to think, the capital. But oftentimes the capital is not the most important city in a region. You can think about Brazil. people think about Rio de Janeiro. They don't think about Brasilia, the capital. Why? Because Sydney, like Brasilia, like New York City, for example, arguably more important than Washington, D.C. Why it's the financial capital, it's the business capital, it's the entertainment capital, though that obviously Los Angeles shares that with LA or with New York, etc. So you'll see that very common where the largest city or the most important city is not necessarily the capital city. Sort of the history a little bit, yes, it was. That's kind of the other stereotype that Australia is a nation of sort of prisoners and brigands and scoundrels, and it was, of course, used as a penal colony in a policy the British called the transport, where they would put people on boats, ship them around to the other side of the world, and basically leave them. And then, of course, as time came and sentences ended and people stayed, and of course corrections personnel brought their families and all of that, it just sort of over time evolved into this independent nation, the Commonwealth. And then, like a lot of places, it has a very similar history with its Aboriginals as we do here in the United States with our Native American tribes, in terms of taking land, taking resources, trying to eradicate culture and all that. That's really what slide 6 kind of highlights some of that. There are, again, hundreds of distinct tribes and languages, so similar to American Indian or Native American doesn't really cut or cover the full richness of the Choctaw, Cherokee, Apache, Navajo, Hopi, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, dozens, hundreds of tribes. Aborigine doesn't really do the same justice to the Aboriginal people groups of Australia. There are some commonalities, a sort of sacredness of the land, and a dream time is a kind of a broad reference to their afterlife. But again, very much similar policy of sort of forced assimilation. There's a really good book called, I can't remember who wrote it, it's called The Rabbit Proof Fence, Rabbit Proof Fence. And there's a movie by the same name based on the book. And it's about these two, a rabbit-proof fence. If you don't know, rabbits are basically really cute rodents, and they'll destroy your vegetation. And so, they dig under, and of course they hop over. So a rabbit-proof fence is a fence that's dug down into the earth, and then it's up high enough to keep them from hopping over. So they had this rabbit infestation. They bisected the continent with this rabbit-proof fence in the early 20th century. They did, again, similar to Americans, they took a lot of Aboriginal kids, made them dress like Europeans, dresses and suits and all that kind of stuff, forbade their language and their religions, and tried to make them good Christians and good English speakers. So these two girls escape, and they don't know how to get home exactly, but they follow the rabbit-proof fence. Anyway, it's an interesting book about the time and the concept and I mean, it's a novel, but I think it's based on a true story. It's a really good book if you're interested in that period of Australian history. And in the 70s, they had their own sort of civil rights movement, and that's another thing I haven't really dealt with in this class much. It's really hard to adequately catch the full worldwide importance of Martin Luther King on minority groups around the world. So obviously he's an American hero. He should be number 5 on Mount Rushmore. And all of that. But when he passes away, gets murdered in 1968, I mean, he's already a hero to many in sub-Saharan Africa and Australia and Latin America, where all these sort of minority groups are trying to sort of, come out from under colonialism. And so he kind of helped spark that in Australia as well. So a lot of these countries in the 1970s, after the passing of Martin Luther King, you see this sort of spark, if you will, and not revolutionary, but really kind of a peaceful, going to use the system, going to use the law, going to protest, going to march, that sort of thing. Excuse me. And then more recently, you have, again, similar to very much the United States, reservations, land return, land reform in a capitalist democratic setting is more along the lines of, here's some of your land back, returning lands that were stolen. So in Australia today, a lot of the outback, which is really where a lot of the tribes sort of came from, those lands are returned back to those tribes, and they have sovereignty over that. We've seen that in Canada. I've seen that in other places as well. In terms of landmarks, obviously the Sydney Opera House, slide 7 there. Slide 8 is the picture of Canberra, which is a very sleepy little burg. It's not like Washington, D.C., which I think is the richest per capita city in the United States. That's a topic for a different class. And then slide 9 is really an example of the land reform. It was called Uluru, I think is how it's pronounced. Europeans, Australians renamed it Ayers Rock, and then the government basically returned it back to the tribe because, as with a lot of things, these sort of high points, and it's this monolith out in the middle of nowhere. It's the highest point for hundreds of miles. And of course, it becomes a sacred spot, a place to access the gods. If you just think of gods in the sky, and that's pretty common amongst a variety of human cultures. So they return it back too. So a couple of years ago, they closed it to climbing, and people were carving their names and chipping off rocks. So to both preserve it and then also to return it back to the tribe, the federal government of Australia closed it off. So you can visit it in certain times and in certain places, but you can no longer climb Ayers Rock. There's a satellite picture of the Great Barrier Reef off the northwest coast of Australia. Again, sort of a famous landmark. Over almost 3,000 reefs and islands, super rich ecosystem. And of course, it's also become more endangered because of diving and shipping and all of that. So Australia has been moving to protect it as well. Slide 11 is New Zealand. Off to the southeast, of Australia. Again, you see the Southern Cross on their flag as well. That's slide 11. It's divided up. It's kind of an archipelago. There's 2 main islands, North Island and South Island, very cleverly named. And that doesn't really have an indigenous tribe. I guess the Maori were there first. There's a great sort of Polynesian diaspora dispersion in the first millennium AD, where they make it as far as, of course, New Zealand, the Maori, and of course into Hawaii and way down into like the Rapa Nui and the Easter Islands off the coast of 400 miles off the coast of Chile. Just a vast dispersion of Polynesian peoples around the world. So there's not really a indigenous in the sense of from the very, very get-go. The Maori came here, took over the land, had lived here, and were there for a good 700 or 800 years until Europeans showed up in there as well. And again, you have the difference, I guess, between, say, the Aborigines, similar to Native Americans in the United States, is because they're not one people group. There's not a cultural cohesion that sort of allows them to unify and sort of adequately resist white encroachment into their lands. Well, the Maori are not that. They're way more organized, way more cohesive unit. So they're able to resist a little more and sort of from the beginning. Again, so there's lots of, don't get me wrong, there's still some, excuse me, I have a super cold, injustice is done. But they're a little more able to resist. One, they get some help from the French because you have the British and French rivalry in the region. And you have lots of treaties and, of course, broken treaties and all that. But so the Maori, again, they come, this is a photograph, I think one of the earliest known photographs of Maori tribesmen. You can see the tattoos, which is common for Samoans and Tongans and other people from the region, Fijians and others that are all basically Polynesian. And they allied themselves with the British, which really sort of set the stage for a rapprochement and a peaceful settlement. And, of course, as usual, the British violated their treaties. And in the last 50 years or so, New Zealand made a sort of quicker to come to the table and make a peace and try to make things right. So by the 1970s, Maori is an official language of New Zealand. So it's both English and Maori. Treaties, contracts, deeds of title, laws that are published, criminal laws, civil laws, all the laws are published in both languages, and all of that. There's state rituals. There's always a Maori representative there. Obviously, they have some, sort of equal rights legislation, equal protection of the law, that kind of stuff as well. And New Zealand sort of, hopped on that train earlier than Australia for sure. The slide 13 is a clip. If you download the PowerPoint, there's a clip of a Maori, a Waka. Maybe you've seen the Fijian national rugby team or sort of do this chant. It's kind of a war chant, so which is very common. I mean, you think about it, just if you play, I played football, and we get to get in a huddle and we rah rah, yeah, all that kind of stuff. It's common to a lot of cultures, but the Maori version is just sort of super charged. And that's a clip of a New Zealand paratrooper unit. They have a couple of fallen comrades that were fighting in Afghanistan back in the 2000s, and they're accompanying these bodies of these two paratroopers to lay them to rest. You'll see a Christian priest, I think Anglican priest, sort of leading the way. And then before they put or are going to inter these bodies into, the unit gets together and does this sort of Maori war chant, if you will. And so it's pretty effective, I think, and moving. Another aspect of the South, slide 14, is the Aurora Australis, which is the Southern Hemisphere version of the Northern Lights. So again, the same atmospheric disturbances. Slide 15 is a picture of White Island. So New Zealand also is a very seismically active region. I think it was 8 or 9 years ago, they had like an 8.3 earthquake that killed a few dozen people. White Island erupted just recently. I couldn't find the video on the short notice, but there is a video on, I think if you go to YouTube and type in White Island, New Zealand volcano or whatever, there's clips of tourist ships in the area sort of having to get the heck out of there. And then 16 is the Southern Alps, which is obviously the biggest region there. So if you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies, a lot of those massive shots of hobbits traipsing over the mountains are filmed there in New Zealand on the South Island. It's lots of skiing and snow sports, winter sports down there as well. Of course, winter is approaching now because they're in the Southern Hemisphere as well. So anyway, that's part of New Zealand. I think the slide title says Oceania. Oceania, actually, I'll talk a little bit about New Guinea on the next video. Thank you.